Hey everyone, it's Horror Free for All, and I hope you're doing well today. I finally decided to kind of remake this video that I made a long time ago on franchise horror reviews that I took down a while ago because I didn't really agree with it, but I think I finally solidified a list enough to make this again. So I'm bringing you a top 10 favorite horror movies of all time video. Now, these are my personal top 10, and just so you're aware, I had so much issues trying to pinpoint 10 that I'm actually cheating and I'm putting my number 10 as like a co-spot with two films. So I'm kind of including 11 here, but the reason why I'm doing so is because I'm a massive movie fan, right? And I've seen so many horror movies, and horror films go back to the dawn of cinema. So there's no way in one lifetime I'm ever going to be able to see everything. So often than not, I go off, just gut instinct, word of mouth, interests, maybe recommendations from friends. And these are just some movies that I've come across in my lifetime that I think about constantly. When I think about horror, these 10 movies come to mind. Some of these I find to be genuine masterpieces. Some of them could be overlooked hidden gems in the genre. Some of these can be kind of hot takey. It depends on who you are. But that's the thing about horror. There's so much content out there, and there's so much iconicness to people. And, you can go to a Spirit Halloween every year, for example, and see the mainstays of horror, at least in the modern lens, of who's really popular and who's not. I'm sure one of those IPs are going to be in everybody's top 10, and you might see one here. But that aside, you're not going to see every movie that you might agree with or put on your list, which is totally fine. This is why I'm treating this like a tag video. If you make videos on YouTube and you would like to make your top 10 favorite horror movies of all time response to this, feel free. It's an open invitation. If you don't make content, just let me know down in the comment section your 10 favorite horror movies, if you can narrow it down. If you want to cheat and put 11 like I did, that's fine. I'm totally on board. I love talking about films, and I just wanted to share with you all which ones I love the most. So, since we have a lot to go over, we might as well start at number 10. Now, my number 10 is a co-spot, and this spot I struggle with the most because I had like 5 movies, and then I narrowed it down to 3, and then I narrowed it down to 2, but both of these movies really do exemplify an era of horror that I really love, and that is the drive-in schlocky era of horror that got into the exploitation side of things. But the ironic thing is that both of these movies did not come out in the 1970s. They actually came out in the mid-2000s as an homage to those movies. And I think because I am a 90s kid, I grew up with these movies, not the 1970s ones. And plus, these have a modern aesthetic to them that I think still resonates with me, or at least with my generation. So that's why these are on my favorite list. But just so you know, I love this era of horror. So the fact that both of these movies homage it in a modern way, I think is gorgeous. And the ones I want to share with in the co-spot at number 10 is House of a Thousand Corpses and Grindhouse. Now, the creators behind Grindhouse, for example, Robert Rodriguez and Quentin Tarantino, made Grindhouse as a double feature, how it would appear in like a drive-in back in the 70s. And I have here the actual theatrical intended release, which is the actual version I'm talking about here when I'm talking about Grindhouse. So you have to watch Planet Terror, the fake trailers, Death Proof, all in its glory with the edits and the design quality on the picture itself, how it was intended. So this is not the broken down version. I have the actual first release of this, not the new re-release that fucked up the edit, but that's what I'm talking about with Grindhouse. So, Robert Rodriguez, Quentin Tarantino, then of course, House of a Thousand Corpses creator Rob Zombie. All three of these directors really understand what made exploitation cinema in the 70s kind of rise, and the counterculture movement that birthed essentially probably the biggest genre in the 1980s, which was slasher movies. But the forefront of all that came from like your sleazy action movies, or your just crazy batshit sci-fi movies, or your exploitation type of films. When I watch all three or at least the two segments in Grindhouse and this film here, I feel like it's like a triple feature of just homaging a golden era of cinema. Now, to talk about them individually, House of a Thousand Corpses is a Hicksploitation love letter. You know, this is definitely paying homage to Rob Zombie's favorite movie from the 1970s, or maybe something from the 60s. This is kind of like an homage to movies like Spider Baby and Texas Chainsaw Massacre, but in the modern setting. And this film kicked off a trilogy of movies, which I know have their own diehard fan base to them, and it's called the Firefly Trilogy. Now, there's many debates out there which one's the best. This one, The Devil's Rejects, Three from Hell, I get it. But the reason why this one is my favorite is just because the style, like I said, homages that time period. But when you get down to the nitty gritty, it's just a fun horror movie. There's a reason why you see Sid Haig's Captain Spaulding. There's a reason why you see Bill Moseley and Sherry Moon Zombie's characters in places like Spirit Halloween every year around October. They're like iconic horror mainstays. And this movie was not a financial success when it came out. It was kind of a bomb, but then it found success through video rentals back in the 2000s. And the fact that this started off like a studio film and it changed hands for many years, and then Zombie edited it down to what he wanted to, and then Lionsgate released it in his vision as best as possible, still, you know, resonates. And I think that for Rob Zombie's first foray into filmmaking, he made a love letter of a movie, and it's an addicting watch. Every time I want to watch something with the Grindhouse aesthetic, I always come to this, or Grindhouse from 2007. Now, this movie is another special thing. Very similar to House of a Thousand Corpses. Robert Rodriguez and Quentin Tarantino, they worked together on many movies beforehand, but they wanted to collaborate and make something that, you know, replicated the movies that they loved to watch in their private screenings in their own homes, which were old exploitation movies. And both of these segments in this film, Planet Terror, Death Proof, even the fake trailers like Don't, Thanksgiving, which went on to become its own film, it's all just a perfect, you know, balance. And it really does emulate the feeling of being in a 1970s drive-in watching these exploitation movies. And the segments are fun as hell. And the actors they got in it are iconic, like Death Proof. You have, at the time, I think it was Robert Rodriguez's wife, Rose McGowan, and then you had Quentin Tarantino putting iconic actors that were pretty much in 1980 staples like Big Trouble in Little China and John Carpenter's The Thing. You had, what was his name? Kurt Russell. You know, he's great in this. And there's so many just fantastic moments in this movie that just stick in my mind rent-free. And the fake trailers in this movie even have spawned their own side movies, and they became their own franchises even, like Machete. And then there's Hobo with a Shotgun. And I've already brought up Thanksgiving, which was a movie released in 2023 by Eli Roth. And there's just something about this movie that really clicks on like House of a Thousand Corpses, and it just makes me want to come back to it a lot. So that's why it's in a co-spot at number 10 for both of these movies. I love them both pretty much equally, and I couldn't pick one over the other because they both kind of fit that. It's a triple bill for me, not just one or the other. So at number 9, now this was more cut and dry for me. This is the only movie that came out before the 1980s that I included on here, but this is my favorite monster movie of all time. And not only that, I think this movie is a lot of creators' favorites, specifically from the Universal Monsters movies. And I'm going to talk about Creature from the Black Lagoon. This movie is so breathtaking. And the fact that this came out in the early to mid 1950s with the 3D gimmick, and the fact that the studio kind of took an original concept and tried to make it into something that spawned a franchise is outstanding. This is one of the first times in film history where a studio kind of made its own IP and turned it into something of a financial success. But the director of this movie, Jack Arnold, and all the makeup people involved of creating the Gillman, the acting ensemble, the way this movie is shot, for a black and white movie, this was incredible. Absolutely incredible. And it's held up for 70 years. It's a must watch from this time period of horror. I mean, there's something about this movie. Yeah, you can call it kind of tame, especially if you like modern horror, or you can kind of make fun of it because it's, you know, the 1950s idea of what's scary. I mean, this is a rated G movie. Even back then, if it had, you know, the rating standards that came out in the 1980s, this probably would have been maybe PG-13, possibly even R for that time. But there's something about this that just holds up incredibly well. The way you see shots in the movie underwater, I mean, it's so ahead of its time. And there's so many movies that came after this that try to replicate underwater scenes that this movie was able to do. Like I said, without this movie, in my opinion, there would never have been the influence to make something like Jaws or try to make something like The Abyss. You know, there was a lot of hurdles and kind of know-how to do some of these things. And this movie just really executes a really fun story, especially for it being a monster-centric story. And so there's something about it, it's so charming. And it's endlessly rewatchable. That's why it's like my favorite of this time period of movies in general. That's why I have this steelbook of it, just because I love it so much. So, yeah, my number 9 goes to Creature from the Black Lagoon. Now, at my number 8, this movie's very recent, and I just brought up Grindhouse, so I feel like it's kind of fitting that I'm talking about this here, but this is Eli Roth's Thanksgiving. I know some people might be like, Thanksgiving is one of your favorite horror movies of all time, and I say, yeah. Bar none, minus another movie on this list, this is my favorite slasher of all time. And the reason why this is my favorite slasher is for the fact that Eli Roth went into this movie trying to make it for fans because it was a fake trailer in Grindhouse, but he understands what made proto-slashers and slasher movies of the 1970s and 80s so popular. They started off like whodunit movies, and you saw this in the 90s when Scream took the whodunit and the dying slasher craze and kind of turned it on its head and made it fun again and made it mainstream. Thanksgiving kind of did the same thing. In an era where we just get a bunch of legacy movies and all that, seeing something like this come out into the mainstream cinemas and make a profit and some pretty good fan appraisal and get merch out, this has become an instant classic in the modern times. I guarantee you, within 25 years, more and more people, you're going to start seeing turn up saying that Thanksgiving is one of their favorite horror movies of all time. John Carver, one of my favorite horror icons of all time. Instantly. The cast in here is so much fun. The kills are brutal and just off the wall, like I want to see in a slasher movie. The plot is engaging. There's a genuine mystery and suspects going on for it. It's just, there's something about it that really clicks and works. And I love everything about it, basically. Some people might be a little harsh on the ending, but the ending is definitely paying homage, like those random stinger endings, to those early 1980s slasher movies. So, all in all, this is a love letter to that era, and I love it deeply. That's why it's one of my favorites of all time. Now, at number 7. This one is going to shock you, but you would understand. This movie, I think, is so influential, especially if you love John Carpenter, that recently, David Gordon Green in his Halloween trilogy literally tried to rip this movie off with Halloween Ends. And it's because, for many years, people considered this kind of like an honorary Halloween movie. It's kind of built up in that similar fashion that the original 1978 was with Michael Myers. And the fact that this movie went kind of unnoticed for so many years and now recently has garnered a lot of fan support is fitting. I mean, this movie's absolutely fantastic. I love everything about it. It's Christine. Now, Christine is an adaptation movie based on a Stephen King novel of the same name, but there is a lot of changes in here. And I have to say, on a technical basis, this is one of the most fun looking movies I've ever seen in terms of how things are carried out with the car itself. Because if you don't know anything about this movie, the car is basically a slasher villain going around killing people. But that's not all that this movie brings. It's a story about kind of manipulating people and making them fall in love with you and removing them from the people that really care about them the most. And it's kind of a commentary on that. And, you know, you want to think that a movie like this would have such a riveting story, but it really does. And it's just a timeless movie. It was filmed in 1982. It came out in 1983. I mean, it has those great early 1980s, late 70s cameras on them. They look fantastic. This movie just imbues cinema to me. It's a forever classic. I never want to see a remake of this movie because this is genuinely perfect. So, love it. That's why it's here. All right, at number 6, we have another John Carpenter movie. And some people might be shocked where I put this, but I absolutely love this movie. It got me into horror. It's one of the first horror movies I ever watched. And I think it's an absolute masterpiece. It's John Carpenter's Halloween from 1978. But I have here the TV cut, which is my favorite version of it because of the extended scenes and all that. I love this movie to death. I mean, Michael Myers, say what you will about Freddy Krueger and Jason Voorhees and all these other slasher icons that people love. Michael Myers, to me, is my slasher icon. I mean, I love the way he is. It's hard to explain, but the Halloween movies are more than just a slasher villain. It's more than just Michael Myers. It's known for having one of the best final girls of all time, Laurie Strode. It's known for having the iconic Dr. Loomis, played by Donald Pleasence, at least in the first 2 installments, and the 4, 5, and 6 installments, because 3 was an anthology movie. But there's just so much to love about this movie, because it essentially popularized a growing genre throughout the history of horror. I mean, it goes back to the late 50s, early 60s, which is the slasher genre. But Halloween really made it a mainstay. And it's the way this movie is shot. You have to see this. This is one of the movies I think you need to watch before you die. It's just beautiful. It's filmed in California. You have this, summertime shot movie, but they made it look like fall. I don't know how they did that, but you can tell the level of intricacy they put into this film, from, John Carpenter down to Deborah Hill to Dean Cundey, everybody involved. Nick Castle, who plays Michael Myers, Jamie Lee Curtis, who plays Laurie Strode as well. This is just a perfect movie. It's a perfect suspense thriller slasher film. I mean, I can go on and on and on and ramble, but that's why it's here. It's just fantastic. Now, my number 5, I actually don't own, so I'm going to superimpose an image here. This movie is from a one-time director, and it was featured in After Dark Horror Fest, of all places, and not a lot of people know about it, but it's a very popular underground found footage movie, and it's probably the only found footage movie that I've ever watched that I think is a masterpiece. And the fact that it's from a one-time director, you cannot contact him, nobody knows what happened to this guy, is incredible to me. And if you're out there watching Joel Anderson, you made one hell of a movie here. It's called Lake Mungo. Lake Mungo is one of these found footage movies that just stick with you. Not only is it probably one of the more cerebral horror movies I've ever watched, but it's one of the very few that I find myself actually scared watching. I'm the type of person that can watch horror and laugh with it. I'm not too easy to scare unless there's some grisly stuff that it makes me think about it. And if you make me think about it, it's going to make me scared. This movie makes me think. And the way it's told is so emotional. And there's certain shots and reveals inside of the film that, as the story goes along, in this mockumentary type of movie, which is also another thing I love about it over other found footage movies. It's played up like, kind of like a Forensic Files episode, but it's a movie length. And it feels so real. And if you played this on like True TV or something, somebody would believe it. So kudos to Joel Anderson and everybody involved with this movie for making something this spectacular. I lament that I don't own this in my collection, but it is absolutely fantastic. It's one of the horror masterpieces in my opinion, and I love it to pieces. So that's why it's here. Now, my top 4 are pretty much forever solidified at this point. I think these 4 movies are my absolute favorites of all time, if I'm being honest. At my number 4 slot, we have a movie by Fede Alvarez. It's kind of a remake, kind of a legacy sequel, not really, but by far one of my favorite modern horror movies ever made. It's Evil Dead 2013. This movie's breathtaking. Whether we're talking about the script and its messages in the story, whether we're talking about the change of, the franchise leaning on Ash Williams within the first 3 installments, to a new character played by Jane Levy, whether we're talking about the upgrade to the Deadites and trying to make Evil Dead go back to its roots of the first movie and being a genuine horror film, this movie just really signifies, in my opinion, the greatness of the Evil Dead franchise. And Evil Dead, if you don't know this about me, maybe next to like Maniac Cop and the Halloween franchise, are my top 3 horror franchises ever. But Evil Dead's my number 1. It's just so consistent, and this movie is definitely the creme de la creme of the franchise. I mean, it's just something, when you watch it, you're watching greatness, and you see the allegory of, drug addiction and coming over your vices and getting essentially reborn and giving a second shot at life. This movie plays on that, and it's so just simple but effective, right? There's something about it that just will linger with you. That's why I love it so much. And the fact that all the original people from the original 3 Evil Dead movies were attached to this. Even Bruce Campbell was on a producer role, which was really nice to see. There's something about this that felt so great. And I'm glad that Evil Dead is still kicking today, because this movie kicked ass. And say what you will about remakes, this is easily the best horror remake ever. I don't care what people say about John Carpenter's The Thing. I don't care what people say about David Cronenberg's The Fly. If we're calling this a remake, which it kind of is, yes, it's the best remake. If we're calling this a legacy sequel, this is the best legacy sequel. I don't care what you call it. It's just fantastic. So that's why it's here. Now, my number 3, say what you will about the director of this movie. He is an absolute piece of shit. Okay, here's the thing. This movie has some controversy behind it because the director was a pedo and confirmed hardcore to be a molester. That's awful. I hate the guy, but I will say this about this film. I love this movie. And it's hard to sometimes separate the art from the artist, but in this specific case, I'm willing to do so because I think this movie is just absolutely fantastic. And I love it in a lot of the same ways why I love Halloween 1978. And that is Jeepers Creepers. Now, this 2001 film, we already talked about the director being controversial. When it came out, it was an immense success. MGM put out this film, and I'm going to say this up front about my favorite a film studio who puts out horror. If I see an MGM horror movie, I'm more inclined to go check that out than I am something like Blumhouse or A24, because historically, MGM knows what the fuck they're doing. And this movie is one of those simple masterpieces like Halloween. And the way it's shot, and the way the 2 main characters of the movie carry themselves are just outstanding. And this is definitely a creature feature playing on some cryptid legends, and there's some lore you learn in the movie. And there's some really tense and creepy shots that have held up very well all these years. And it's just a movie that it's like endlessly rewatchable. Whenever I want to watch a horror movie, I always think about Jeepers Creepers. There's something about it that makes me want to come back to it. Whether we're talking about me wanting to see The Creeper or wanting to watch the absolutely iconic first 10 minutes of this movie. I think it has one of the best horror movie openings of all time. And if you don't know this, it's actually kind of like a ripoff of one of my favorite Unsolved Mystery segments, featuring a person named Dennis Depew back in the day. There's a whole thing about it on YouTube if you want to watch it. But I love that show too, and it reminds me of my love for Unsolved Mysteries as well. It's just, there's something kind of like case specific for my taste here about it. But the movie is just a timeless classic. I think it was easily, the best 2000s horror movie to come out. Period, bar none. Absolutely love it. And I still do today. I know the controversy, but like I said, I'm not gonna be around the bush and lie to you. I still love it, and it's one of my all-time faves. So there you go. Now my top two are basically interchangeable. I go back and forth on this a lot, but I'm gonna settle with this order here. Some people might be shocked that this movie is actually on here, but I absolutely love this movie. I think Tommy Lee Wallace is one of the most criminally underrated directors of all time. Of all time, next to Chris Walas. And trust me, as much as I wanted to include movies like The Vagrant on here, or maybe Fright Night Part 2, this movie, I've loved it ever since the first time I saw it. And the fact that Nigel Neal, John Carpenter, and Tommy Lee Wallace made something so unique and so different really does help this for me. And it's a must-watch every year around Halloween. Like, if I don't watch this movie, I'm legitimately sad. It's Halloween 3, Season of the Witch. Absolutely fantastic movie. It's one of the biggest masterpieces I've ever come across in cinema. And here's the thing about horror movies. I love a good anti-hero horror movie. Especially when, the movie, kind of puts the main character into a position where they kind of have to put aside their ego or something to save the day. And this story has one of the most batshit concepts, but some of the best stakes I've seen in a horror movie. Now, for it being a horror movie, yeah, some people can complain about the kills and all that not being all that, but I think the kills in this movie are fantastic. Some people can complain about the plot and the pacing of it. I think it's perfectly paced for what it's trying to do. It's a mystery, and they're uncovering bits and pieces as they go along. But man, this movie is just all atmosphere. So iconic with the three masks you see right here. Don Chalice has to be one of my favorite film characters of all time, played by the Tom Atkins. He's absolutely incredible in this. Dan O'Herlihy, who plays the villain in this, is absolutely fantastic. I mean, the list can go on about this movie, but I love this thing. It's amazing. And I know it has its diehard fans and some massive fans out there, but I'm not going to lie. I mean, I love this movie to pieces. And I would change nothing about it. And yes, if you're going to ask me what's one of the best Halloween movies in the franchise, I'm always going to tell you Season of the Witch, top 2, next to 78. So there you go. Eat that. But my number one favorite horror movie of all time is not going to shock any of you. I mean, you can probably guess. You see this whole section here. This movie made me fall in love with horror films. Like, I said that about Halloween 1978. It made me a horror fan. But I got obsessed with horror films after watching this. And this kind of birthed my love for anthology horror. And there's something about this movie that is just timeless. And it just really works. I can watch this movie at any time of the year and just be more and more in love with it than the last time I watched it. And it's Creepshow from 1982. Yes, Creepshow is my favorite horror movie of all time. Directed by George Romero, written by Stephen King, co-written in some places with George Romero as well. But this movie imbues everything I love about horror. Not only do you have a fall atmosphere, but you have this comic book aesthetic. And there's certain things done in this movie to kind of pay homage to the 1950s EC horror comics that were super popular with kids, that caused the controversy to birth the Comics Code of Authority. And not only is this movie a love letter to that, but the stories in here are fucking fantastic. They're all metaphorical stories with deep subtext and layers to peel back. They're super fun. They're out there in that comic book way, but they emulate some of my favorite things about horror, which is the schlock and the over-the-top nature and the fact that you're able to take a ridiculous concept and kind of vibe with it because it's telling a thematic story. One of my favorite things in horror I've ever come across is in this movie called The Crate. It's one of my favorite stories, and it makes me think every time I watch it. And I know what it's trying to say, but every time I watch it, I can pick up a different little piece that I didn't catch on the time before. And that goes with every other story as well. I mean, the acting performances from each individual segment is just iconic to me. And this is a movie that I think is a tremendous feat in cinema history. I think this movie kind of revolutionized anthology horror. I mean, it was a thing before it, but anthology horror, the hype of it, I think, was caused by Creepshow. And then that snowballed into some more films, that snowballed into Tales from the Dark Side getting a TV show. And then that laid the groundwork for shows like Tales from the Crypt to come out later on. So without Creepshow, I don't think that anthology horror would have had that heyday like it did. And I think it kind of changed horror forever. At least in that context. And the fact that it's kind of keeping anthology horror alive today is very impressive through television. But still, like, I love this movie. I love that it birthed the franchise. One of the worst films of all time, though, came as a product of this, which was Creepshow 3. But I don't blame the creators of this movie for that fucking cinematic abortion, because they were trying to, you know, I guess make a cash grab off the name here, which is sad, but that's a testament to it at the same time. I mean, I just love this movie, and I've always loved it, and I always will love it. That's why it's here in my #1 slot. I'm a massive fan. I have every single Creepshow story ever made, and there's a reason for that. It's fantastic. So yeah, that's my top 10 favorite horror movies of all time. Let me know down in the comment section, did you like my picks? Like I said before, if you want to treat this as a tag video, go ahead and share with with everyone, including myself, what are your top 10 favorite horror movies? If you don't want to make a video, put it down in the comment section, what the movies are down there if you'd like. I love talking horror, so I'd be curious to see which ones you guys pick out there. So, till next time, take care, and have a good one.